Our top story, Special Counsel Jack Smith's breakthrough as he tries to take a fairly assertive and proactive approach to prosecuting Trump for the coup. And this concerns a mystery surrounding Trump's actions during the January 6th plotting, the speech, the insurrection, and those long, tense hours when Trump stood by while his fans committed what is now a convicted sedition. Some of that is, of course, so well known that people look up and say, what are we still debating in court? I've told you before, the process takes time. But part of the process is getting more evidence and a better view of how this all went down, including potentially who Trump was talking to or messaging with, who he was communicating with as the sedition unfolded. We know Trump spent part of the time in his private White House dining room. We know that he watched the violence unfold on television. We know that during the period of that tense time, and you really have to bring yourself back to how it felt. No one knew how many people might die or who would be killed or how long it would take to get order again. But during that very period, he posted online on what was then called Twitter about condemning Mike Pence as his fans hunted Pence down. That's a lot of what's known. There's other things, though, we don't fully know. And that's because there is a 7-hour gap in what are normally meticulous White House call logs, and not on just any day, but on the obviously quite suspicious and now criminally investigated day of January 6th from, as you see here in this Post report, around the 11 a.m. hour all the way up to about 7 p.m. Now, that has been something that many people have wanted answers to. Journalists research that kind of thing. People call each other. People ask questions. Sometimes you find a hint or a clue or a leak from people inside the White House. Why did the logs go missing? You may recall missing material was a big part of what ultimately undid the Nixon presidency in Watergate. Well, now there are clues. According to Jack Smith's new court filing, he has obtained what one investigator in this area has called the holy grail of the evidence against Trump, his own cell phone data. Let me repeat that, a lot flying around. This is the cell phone data of Donald Trump that may have clues about what he did do or didn't do or what he lied about on January 6th. This filing indicating they've extracted and processed data from the White House cell phones used by the defendant, that is, Defendant Trump. And the team reviewed and analyzed data on the defendant's phone and determined the usage of these phones through the post-election period, including on and around, and that's standard legal language, basically, they got the evidence for Jan 6, 2021. They've specifically identified, they write, periods of time during which the defendant's phone was unlocked and the Twitter application was open on January 6th. That's important because you can imagine a defense where someone says politicians like the president have many people potentially tweeting or writing online for their behalf. Smith also states they have the phone data of an individual one. That's an anonymous individual. So experts say this is the kind of thing that can add to the evidence of what Trump did or didn't do, which can box him in. That goes to his public conduct, that he really did send out this or that message or tweet, and to his secret conduct of who he called and how long they spoke and who texted him and what he replied and what that says about the larger defense that he will try to make. Because if part of that defense is, hey, a lot was going on, or I didn't know this, or as soon as I heard there was violence, I did tell them to be peaceful, well, the evidence may say something different about those kind of claims. This could also show whether, quote, Trump personally approved or sent, as I mentioned, that very fateful tweet attacking Pence. That's how Politico puts it. The January 6th committee did not get this far. Indeed, in that final report, which we've discussed here and recently discussed with their Vice Chair Cheney, the committee was clear that it was, quote, unable to locate official records of Trump's telephone calls that afternoon. And the witnesses asked about this, because this has been an area of quite a bit of investigative interest. They either wouldn't answer in those depositions and hearings, or they would claim they had no idea.
So are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Defense that day?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Attorney General of the United States that day?
No.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Homeland Security that day?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Did you speak to President Trump on his private cell phone on either January 5th or January 6th?
Once again, on advice of counsel, I will assert my Fifth Amendment right to respectfully decline to answer your question.
let's walk through in plain English what we just saw there. The second clip is of a defendant, Roger Stone, who we've heard so much about, basically saying that to truthfully answer whether they spoke that day, him and the then loser of the 2020 election, outgoing President Trump, if he admitted or spoke about whether they had that contact, that could implicate him in a crime. That's not good, but as we've said, it's also his right in that kind of proceeding to invoke the Fifth Amendment. But that would go to him not wanting to say it. If there is enough phone data swirling around that Jack Smith has of the president's phone, of phones the president's used, or Roger Stone and others, they may be able to prove up that question in court without Stone's testimony. On the other side, we heard Liz Cheney's disembodied voice, the nature of the way they shot the deposition, asking the basic questions that you'd ask any commander-in-chief. Again, if the Capitol is attacked as a national security event, it is now, of course, as I mentioned, a convicted sedition. It doesn't matter who's doing the sedition. It's not supposed to, right? Could be a foreign terrorist group. Could be domestic terrorists. Could be people who claim that they support this or that politician or the sitting president. But it is a baseline obligation of the commander-in-chief to defend the country. Everybody knows that. And so what Cheney was illustrating there was the lack of awareness, and thus the possibility that it didn't happen, that Trump ever lifted a finger to anyone, from the military to the attorney general to anyone, to try to defend the United States. Why? Because you don't defend, allegedly, against the sedition, insurrection, and attack that you yourself planned, started, and wanted. I say allegedly because, again, this is all going to be litigated by Jack Smith in the coup trial. Trump's lawyers say that he is innocent. He is legally presumed innocent, and they argue that calls or missing calls are not enough to prove the coup case. Now, meanwhile, John Eastman, of course, one of the architects of the coup, we do know the FBI long ago seized his cell phone in New Mexico. You've seen that video. This was long before his Georgia indictment. The feds were on him. We know Jeffrey Clark faced the feds in a lawful search, which was quite historic. Also had Nixon-era echoes, because there you see the feds pulling him out in his pajamas of his home. Those are the same law enforcement officials for the federal government he used to oversee at the DOJ. They came to search his home under a lawful order, and they're going to find out what, if anything, is in that evidence. So what are on these phones? And what is the counter-argument if you're pursuing this kind of case and you're trying to prove a negative, like, oh, you didn't call anyone, you didn't reach out to the Secretary of Defense? Is that enough for Jack Smith in a case that we've mentioned? He is now asking the Supreme Court to greenlight and fast track. So there are answers. Either way, it could be good or bad news for Trump. Trump could beat this case. But Jack Smith asking the Supreme Court to get involved. So there are answers to everything we just talked about tonight here, the phone data, the nature of the conspiracy, whether Trump didn't want to intervene in something that he had actually planned, or whether he can ultimately prove somehow that there's enough reasonable doubt that the government didn't carry its burden. We're back with David Kelly, my former boss in law and the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Welcome, David. We look at what Jack Smith, according to the filings, got a hold of. What do you see there as a prosecution roadmap?
When I first saw it, I said, geez, this is really compelling. Let's talk a little bit about what you can do with that evidence. First off, you're not going to have the contents of any phone calls. It's not like a wiretap. It's unclear from his submission whether or not there's actually information. There's actual text messages, if you can actually read the text messages. But even if there's not, this is still really powerful evidence, because what a prosecutor will do is take the whole series of calls, when the calls were made, to whom the calls were made, and really chart it out and draw connections to incidents that coincide. So in other words, let's, just hypothetically, he makes a phone call to Roger Stone, and then suddenly the Oath Keepers are off and running to the Capitol. So it can be very compelling evidence about, just drawing, connecting the dots and drawing connections between phone calls to particular people and then incidents that happened in the wake of those calls.